welcome you to this Bible study of the Banking Blessings Ministry. My name is Goodluck Ofebu, and this is my wife,
Obi Ofebu.
We welcome you to our continuing study on responding to adversity. And for the past two Bible studies, we've been looking at the life of Mordecai. Remember that Mordecai faced the adversity of being held captive in a foreign country, living in very modest means, and being subjected to a situation where something that she did appeared to be responsible for a conspiracy against him and his people. We remember that Mordecai brought up his uncle's daughter Esther, and Esther eventually became the queen of King Xerxes. And Mordecai, throughout his life in captivity, throughout his life in very adverse conditions, he remained steadfast in his commitment to worship and serve God. And one opportunity for him to demonstrate this came when Haman, one of the king's nobles, was promoted to a very high position in the palace, second to the king. And people were expected to bow and really essentially worship Haman each time they saw him. Mordecai refused to do this. He refused to bow. He refused to show any special respect that could be construed as worship. And this infuriated Haman a lot. But instead of trying to visit his anger on Mordecai, he used the opportunity actually to start a conspiracy against Mordecai's people, the Jews. He wanted to annihilate the Jews. In fact, he obtained the authority from the king to issue an edict, to issue a decree in the name of the king, that every Jew in the provinces, within 127 provinces under King Xerxes, would be killed on the 13th day of the 12th month. And this decree was published and was published in every province, every language, and was the law of the land everywhere under King Xerxes. The Jews protested, they mourned, maybe prepared for their annihilation. Mordecai protested at the king's gate. He could not enter the king's palace because he was wearing the attire for mourning, that is sackcloth, they called it, and they wouldn't let anybody wearing sackcloth to enter the palace. Then, while at the gate, he was able to convince Esther to join the protest. One of the fears that Esther had, Esther's main fear, was that going to the king without invitation could mean death for her, because that was the law. Anybody that came to the king without being invited would be killed automatically, unless the king had mercy on the person and extended the person an invitation by extending his staff for the person to touch. Well, when Esther was convinced to join the protest, she saw that there was only one place she could trust, only one place she could lay her plan would be based on her faith in God to lead her and to soften the heart of the king so that the king would accept her when she did go to the king. So she called for 3 days of prayer and fasting among all the Jews in the capital province, in the citadel of Susa. Well, they prayed and fasted for 3 days, and at the end of 3 days, Esther got up, dressed up to go and visit with the king. So today we're going to look at what happened in Esther's visit to the king. Of course, her mission was to make an appeal to the king on behalf of her people. Before we start, I'll let my wife make an opening statement if she's interested in making an opening statement. Or you can talk anytime you want.
Yeah, well, thank you for the opportunity. I'd like to welcome our viewers, those who log in onto our website, those who download, those who watch us Facebook. I'd like to thank all of you. Like previously said, the event or the story of Mordecai and Queen Esther and the things that happened at the time that it happened was, one would see that they were set up for such a time as they were living in at that time, because God knew He was going to use them to elevate the Jews. Let me put it that way, to free the Jews. Inside it, both Mordecai and Esther faced a great deal of adversity, and the story ends well, but it's very educating and very it ministers to us Christians to see what they had to go through in order to cope with the adversity, especially Mordecai, that realized that adversity, whom it was centered around, before he could even overcome that and then enlist the help of Esther, for this to be a successful story. So I would urge us to listen to it and get to the end of it.
Yes. Okay. And we will learn that God's intervention in the life of Mordecai and the Jews under King Xerxes came through Esther's appeal to the king. And her appeal helped elevated Mordecai over his adversity. He triumphed over the conspiracy against him and his people, and he overcame his enemies and overcame poverty. We are going to learn about this in Esther chapters 5 through 9. We're not going to read the whole thing, of course. We'll be making selections. But we urge our listeners to take time and read, because there is a lot of useful lessons. So hopefully we will highlight the lessons so that when you read with an intention to understand them more. Well, Esther went to King Xerxes. She already knew that it could mean death for her, but she had faith in God. She had prayed for 3 days, and all her people had prayed and fasted for 3 days with her. So in the morning, she dressed up, went into the outer court of the king's palace, and stood in the outer court. He said, in front of the king's house, the king's private residence. The king was, of course, sitting there, raised his head and saw Esther. As soon as he saw Esther, he did the ceremonial welcome. He extended his scepter, the gold scepter in his hand, which was a way to say, okay, even though you didn't have an invitation, you can come, you are invited. So he granted audience to Esther. Esther came to him, and the king immediately asked Esther what she wanted, and promised her that whatever she wanted would be granted, even if it meant up to half of the kingdom. We will find that Esther did not take she didn't take the offer immediately. She actually delayed it. She postponed. So instead of telling the king right there and then what she wanted to tell the king, she instead invited the king to a banquet. He invited the king and invited the king to bring Haman with him to the banquet. So we will find that the king, we'll go through this. You see that the king gave Esther 3 opportunities to tell him what she wanted. Esther postponed it the first 2 times, and then on the 3rd time she took the opportunity. But an interesting thing happened, that the postponement actually created opportunity for favorable events. That's events that were favorable to Mordecai and Esther's cause to occur. And these events affected the king's response at the 3rd time when Esther took his offer and actually made her request. But let's not look too far ahead. Let us read about this, about Esther's first meeting with the king after the fasting, in Esther chapter 5 verses 1 through 8 and chapter 7 verses 1 and 2.
The book of Esther chapter 5, reading from New King James Version. Verse 1. Now it happened on the 3rd day that Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace across from the king's house, while the king sat on his royal throne in the royal house, facing the entrance of the house. So it was, when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, that she found favor in his sight, and the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. Then Esther went near and touched the top of the scepter.
Okay, so Esther came without invitation, but the king granted her audience, and that's the significance of holding out the scepter. And he immediately invited Esther to present her petition. Let's read about that.
Verse 3. And the king said to her, What do you wish, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given to you, up to half the kingdom.
So King Xerxes promised to grant Esther's request, even up to the most that she could ask. But for some reason, Esther was not ready, and she didn't tell us why. The Bible didn't tell us why, but she was not ready. So instead, she invited the king to a banquet and requested the king to bring Haman with him to the banquet. Let's read on.
Verse 4. Esther chapter 5 verse 4. So Esther answered, If it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today to the banquet that I have prepared for him. Then the king said, Bring Haman quickly, that he may do as Esther has said. So the king and Haman went to the banquet that Esther had prepared. Verse 6. At the banquet of wine, the king said to Esther, What is your petition? It shall be granted you. What is your request? Up to half the kingdom? It shall be done.
Okay, so the king again, this is the 2nd time, asked Esther to present her request and promised that her request will be granted, whatever it is, up to half of the kingdom. Again, Esther was not ready. Instead, she invited the king to another banquet for the next day. Said, Please, I'll prepare a banquet for you tomorrow, and I want you to come with a man.
Verse 7. Then Esther answered and said, My petition and request is this. If I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, then let the king and Haman come to the banquet which I will prepare for them, and tomorrow I will do as the king has said. Esther chapter 7 verse 1. So the king and Haman went to dine with Queen Esther. And on the second day, at the banquet of wine, the king again said to Esther, "What is your petition, Queen Esther? It shall be granted you. And what is your request? Up to half the kingdom. It shall be done."
Okay, so for the third time, the king invited Esther to present her request and promised her that her request will be granted, whatever it is, up to half of the kingdom. Well, after the first banquet, so what we've done is we've seen the three the interaction between Esther during which the king invited Esther to present her request. But actually, after the first banquet, Haman was in high spirit. He went by, but as he was going, he saw Mordecai at the gate, and Mordecai again did not bow to him the way that everybody was bowed to Haman. So Haman went back to his house. He managed to contain his annoyance, his hatred of Mordecai. But when he got home, he called his advisors, called his wife, and said, "Look, I'm such a great man," and he boasted about all the things he had. Then he admitted to them and said that all these things he had meant nothing to him for as long as Mordecai was alive and sitting at the king's gate. This is the level of hatred. So when his wife saw how bitter he was about Mordecai, he advised Haman and said, "Okay, build a gallows in front of your house, and in the morning talk to the king, and the king will approve that you kill Mordecai on this gallows. Have him hung in the gallows in the morning, and then in the evening you and the king can go to Esther for your banquet." And this advice pleased Haman. He accepted it, had the gallows built, and his intention was to go to the king in the morning. So this is the first event that occurred. We will see that Haman eventually was hung on the gallows that he built for Mordecai. And his building the gallows and his intention to hang Mordecai on it actually helped his hatred for Mordecai to come to the surface, to be fully understood by all, including the king. And we'll see that this was favorable to Mordecai, because the king, of course, the king who had the authority, the only person that had authority over Haman, got to understand that there was no reason for Haman to have that kind of hatred against another human being. Let us read about this in Esther chapter 5, verses 9 to 14.
Esther chapter 5, again reading from the New King James Version, verse 9. "So Haman went out that day joyful and with a glad heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, and that he did not stand nor tremble before him, he was filled with indignation against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home, and he sent and called for his friends and his wife Zeresh. Then Haman told them of his great riches, the multitude of his children, everything in which the king had promoted him, and how he had advanced him above the officials and the servants of the king. Moreover, Haman said, "Besides, Queen Esther invited no one but me to come in with the king to the banquet that she has prepared, and tomorrow I am again invited by her along with the king. Yet all this avails me nothing, so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate." Then his wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, "Let a gallows be made 50 cubits high, and in the morning suggest to the king that Mordecai be hanged on it. Then go merrily with the king to the banquet. And the thing pleased Haman, so he had the gallows made.
Okay, so that's the first thing that happened. Remember, Esther had several opportunities to present her request, but postponed each time. So during this time, during her postponement, two events occurred that were favorable to Mordecai, highly favorable. We just talked about the first one. The second one is that night, the king couldn't sleep. He had sleepless night, like most people, a lot of people would occasionally. So he called for his records, his chronicle, to be read to him. So they brought the book and read. As they were reading, they came across the incident of Mordecai exposing assassination plots against the king. Two of the king's gate men wanted to assassinate him. Mordecai got wind of the plot and reported it to Esther, and then Esther reported to the king. But when Esther reported, she gave credit to Mordecai, as it is right. So when they read this section to the king, he wondered and said, what has been done for this man that exposed an assassination plot against me, a man that saved his life? What have they done for that man? And it turned out that nothing. His people told him, say, look, nothing has happened, nothing has been done to reward this man. As he was talking to them, this was in the morning, Haman already was standing outside, coming to talk to the king about hanging Mordecai on the gallows that he built. But the king first asked his question. He asked Haman, how should the king honor somebody? What should the king do for somebody that the king wants to honor? Haman thought that it was him that the king, who else would the king honor but Haman? So he proposed the big things, you know, getting a robe that the king has worn, getting a horse that the king had ridden and all that, robing the man and putting him on the horse and leading him all around town to advertise him. The king said, wonderful, okay, you do everything you have said, except it is for Mordecai. So Haman, of course, had obeyed the king. He did everything he said, and after he had taken Mordecai around town, he brought Mordecai back, and he was even more furious. But let us read about this in Esther chapter 6. It goes from verses 1 to 14, but we're not going to read the whole thing. We'll read verses 1 to 3, verse 10, and verse 12.
Esther chapter 6, this is from the New International Version. Verse 1. That night the king could not sleep, so he ordered the book of the Chronicles, the record of his reign, to be brought in and read to him. It was found recorded there that Mordecai had exposed Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, who had conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. What honor and recognition has Mordecai received for this? The king asked. Nothing has been done for him, his attendants answered. Verse 10. Go at once, the king commanded Haman. Get the robe and the horse, and do just as you have suggested for Mordecai, the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Do not neglect anything you have recommended. Afterward, Mordecai returned to the king's gate, but Haman rushed home with his head covered in grief.
Well, so those two things happened that brought Mordecai's name back to the forefront in a favorable way to the king. Actually, the king had not reacted to the first event, that is Haman wanting to kill Mordecai. Haman didn't get the opportunity to request that from the king yet. But the king now saw Mordecai in a very favorable way, because this is the man that exposed, saved his life. Then they went to the second banquet, that is the king and the Haman. And at this banquet, the king asked Esther for the third time what she wanted, what was her request. Then Esther presented her request to the king. The king became very furious when he found out that Haman had plotted to annihilate the Jews, including Esther, because Esther was a Jew. So the king got very furious, and right there and then he ordered that Haman should be executed. And the person that the eunuch that was given the responsibility to do that pointed out to the king that Haman had built a gallows in front of his house, intending to hang Mordecai on it. And then the king said, okay, hang him on it. And they took Haman and hanged him, or hung him, on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Let us read about this, Esther chapter 7, verses 1 through 10.
Esther chapter 7, verse 1. So the king and Haman went to Queen Esther's banquet. And as they were drinking wine on the second day, the king again asked, Queen Esther, what is your petition? It will be given you. What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be granted. Verse 3. Then Queen Esther answered, if I have found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life. This is my petition. And spare my people. This is my request. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. If we had merely been sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet, because no such distress would justify disturbing the king. Verse 5. King Xerxes asked Queen Esther, who is he? Where is he? The man who has dared to do such a thing. Esther said, an adversary and enemy, this vile Haman. Then Haman was terrified before the king and queen. The king got up in a rage, left his wine, and went out into the palace garden. But Haman, realizing that the king had already decided his fate, stayed behind to beg Queen Esther for his life. The king exclaimed, verse 8. Just as the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet hall, Haman was fallen on the couch where Esther was reclining. The king exclaimed, will he even molest the queen while she is with me in the house? As soon as the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs attending the king, said, a pole reaching to a height of 50 cubits stands by Haman's house. He has set it up for Mordecai, who spoke up to help the king. The king said, impale him on it. So they impaled Haman on the pole he had set up for Mordecai. Then the king's fury subsided.
So the king's fury subsided after they hung Haman on the pole that he had built for Mordecai. Well, Esther didn't stop there. He realized, okay, yes, the king's fury has subsided, but Haman's decree was still in force. And if nothing happened, it would still be carried out. So she reminded the king and begged the king to have the decree overturned. The king gave Haman's estate to Esther, and then he elevated, he elevated Mordecai to the position that Haman used to occupy, to a second in command of the king. And the way he did this was he pulled the signet ring that was his, that he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. That signet ring was a sign of authority. And then he authorized Esther and Mordecai to write a new decree in the name of the king to empower the Jews, to give the Jews the right to assemble, the right to protect themselves, and the right to fight against their enemy, to try to destroy any person that came against them, to fight and destroy or annihilate anybody that came against them. So Esther's request, Esther's appeal to the king was successful. But not only was successful, but the events that happened during the time that she was postponing her request actually opened the king's eyes to see what kind of evil Haman was, and also to remember Mordecai as somebody that did something good for him, as a good person, to come to recognize Mordecai as a good person. And there and then he elevated Mordecai to the highest position in the land, second only to the king. So Mordecai conquered his poverty, he conquered his enemies. We'll see in the reading that in fact the Jews became empowered and actually were given the authority to destroy their enemies, and they did. We will not read the part where they did, but they actually did. Well, let us read the conclusion of this. It's a lot of reading. We are not going to do most of it. Esther chapter 8, verses 1 to 2, 7 to 8, verse 11 and 15 to 17. And then Esther chapter 9, verses 1 to 4, and chapter 10, verse 3. A lot of reading. Yeah, but I'm sure my wife is equal to it, so let's go.
Okay, so we're reading the book of Esther chapter 8, verse 1 to 2. Verse 1. That same day King Xerxes gave Queen Esther the estate of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. And Mordecai came into the presence of the king, for Esther had told how he was related to her. The king took off his signet ring, which he had reclaimed from Haman, and presented it to Mordecai, and Esther appointed him over Haman's estate. Verse 7. King Xerxes replied to Queen Esther and to Mordecai the Jew, because Haman attacked the Jews, I have given his estate to Esther, and they have impaled him on the pole he set up. Now write another decree in the king's name in behalf of the Jews as seems best to you, and seal it with the king's signet ring, for no document written in the king's name and sealed with his ring can be revoked. The king's edict granted the Jews in every city the right to assemble and protect themselves. This is verse 11. To destroy, kill, and annihilate the armed men of any nationality or province who might attack them and their women and children, and to plunder the property of their enemies. Verse 15. When Mordecai left the king's presence, he was wearing royal garments of blue and white, a large crown of gold, and a purple robe of fine linen, and the city of Susa held a joyous celebration. For the Jews it was a time of happiness and joy, gladness and honor. Verse 17. Chapter 8, verse 17.
Yeah, that's it.
In every province and in every city to which the edict of the king came, there was joy and gladness among the Jews, with feasting and celebrating. And many people of other nationalities became Jews because fear of the Jews had seized them. Verse 9, chapter 9, verse 1. On the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, the edict commanded by the king was to be carried out. On this day, the enemies of the Jews had hoped to overpower them, but now the tables were turned, and the Jews got the upper hand over those who hated them. Verse 2. The Jews assembled in their cities in all the provinces of King Xerxes to attack those determined to destroy them. No one could stand against them because the people of all the other nationalities were afraid of them. Verse 3 of chapter 9. And all the nobles of the provinces, the satraps, the governors, and the king's administrators helped the Jews because fear of Mordecai had seized them. Mordecai was prominent in the palace. His reputation spread throughout the provinces, and he became more and more powerful. Chapter 10, verse 3. Mordecai the Jew was second in rank to King Xerxes, preeminent among the Jews, and held in high esteem by many fellow Jews, because he worked for the good of his people and spoke up for the welfare of all the Jews.
Well, so we see it. Mordecai, a lowly person that was held in captivity along with several other Jews, but he was very poor, but he remained, even though things were hard for him, he remained steadfast in his commitment to worship and serve God. And we saw all the things he did, and through this, especially his commitment to worship God and his refusal to worship Haman, that they started a sequence of events that led to his triumph over adversity. We saw that at the end, Mordecai ascended to the highest position in the land, next only to the king. He was no longer a poor person. He triumphed over his enemies, and all this happened because he worshipped God unconditionally. He worshipped God even when things were not good for him. Let me let my wife talk, because I've been talking a lot. This is a very interesting subject, and
it's really very interesting that this is an event or a story that has so many parts, that brings out so many things, so many ways, and so many principles, and of God, and both what we have to do as man in order to walk into God's purpose. Most of the time is not a pleasure walk. It's not a walk in the park.
Yeah.
But if we remain steadfast, like Mordecai did and Esther, then we'll see that God has actually gone way ahead of us. Why do I say this? If we look at the events that happened, Queen Esther told Haman to gather the Jews to pray, fast and pray for her.
Yeah. Because
her fear was that if she went to the king without being summoned, without being called for, that means her death.
Yes.
So that was what she requested.
Yeah.
So that the king can grant her audience. But you see, that prayer and fasting opened up the way, opened up God's strategy.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just that the king beckoned her, accepted her, or called her to come. But all the other events, like, her postponing to make her request and petition, and the king, being sleepless. Because remember, at this time, the king, Esther had not told the king what her petition was.
No.
One could say maybe that's part of why he was restless. Like, this woman has given me, my queen has given me banquet and is inviting me for the second one and all that, and yet she's saying nothing.
Yeah,
what does she want? What can be troubling her? That's enough to make anybody, any husband to be restless. So the Bible didn't tell us that's why, but the king was restless. Oftentimes when God's agenda is there, he will make the people that he wants to help us to be restless until they have delivered that which he wants them to deliver to our case.
Yes.
Now remember that the fasting and prayer was, oh, let the king, and because they would have had prayer points.
Yes.
Let the king accept Queen Esther when she comes and all that.
Yeah.
But you see, it opened up all the way for the other things,
Yeah.
led by the Holy Spirit.
Yes.
You know, Esther didn't make any request the first time. Only said, my request is come tomorrow again to my banquet and all that. So once we are steadfast, prayer and fasting, we might be thinking, oh, this is the way God is going to do it. But that act of surrender to God, saying, help us, opens up what he wants to do. Now, another thing that that occurred to me here, it's not the first time, but I have seen it in every story we have done about coping with adversity.
Yes.
And that is what? Beside the steadfastness and the faith, and everything I'm saying happened in all of them, they always inquired of the Lord. Remember David, when they carried away his wives and his children and whatever, and the people wanted to stone him, he inquired of the Lord. He said, should I pursue, will I overtake?
Yes.
So you might say that was because prayer and fasting is inquiring of the Lord.
Yes, that's what it is.
So there was, these things are constant. Inquire of the Lord for direction.
Yes.
And he will give you the direction.
Yes.
Okay? Now, the faith and the steadfastness committed to that thing they want to do. When God rewards you, when you come through that adversity, he doesn't just give you. Remember, Esther asked for her life and the life of her people.
Yeah.
But what did they get? Mordecai got elevated.
Yes.
Esther got Haman's estate.
Yes.
The Jews got permission to destroy their enemies. Yes. Got permission to assemble.
Yes.
It was a mighty overflow.
Yes.
Whenever we hang in there, walk according to God's strategy.
Yes.
Walk with God in his strategy. And that, of course, is not when we have gone 3/4 of the way we say, God, bless the way we are going.
Yeah.
It's by asking him ab initio, should we do this?
Yes.
And once we realize and walk with that, at the end of it is always an overflow.
Yes.
So that is why sometimes some people, when trouble comes, they rejoice. And I think it's somewhere in the psalm. They rejoice because they know that blessing is coming
Behind
at the end of it.
Yes.
You know, blessing is coming. So when we are faced with adversity, we inquire of God what we should do, not go trusting in our own understanding and doing it by our own power and might and asking God to bless it. No, but we ask God, what should we do?
Yes.
Then, you know, we remain steadfast, even in the face of the circumstance. No matter what the threat is, we remain steadfast,
Yes.
knowing that God will deliver us from
Yes.
this,
Yes.
and walk in the strategy he has given us. And at the end, there's always a mighty overflow that is not just for you, but for, because overflow, you can't contain it.
Yes.
It is for people around you.
Yeah.
So this went, you know, to the Jews, and they got much more than they requested.
Yes.
David's men plundered, they got everything back, not one person, not one thing was lost. But in addition, they got the plunder, the spoil from their enemies.
Yes. Yes. In this case, the overflow was for God bless Esther and Mordecai, but the overflow was everywhere.
Everybody, yes.
And their friends.
And their friends. And even God drew people to himself.
Yes.
Remember that some of the other nationalities became Jews.
Yes.
Because of the fear of the Jews.
Yes. Yes.
So God drew people. It's most times our adversity. Look at Job. Look at it. Is for us it becomes a testimony that draw people to the kingdom of God, or that exhibits the power of God. Look again at Daniel.
Yes.
Look again at Daniel when they were, thrown into the lion's den.
Yeah, he was. Yes.
And all that. And when he came out,
there was nothing.
Nothing happened to him.
Yeah.
But rather, people around him said, "Your God is the true God," and that is the God they worship,
Yes.
including the king himself.
Yeah. Yes.
So there is always, God wants to make a name for himself. If we can look beyond our present adversity and see a bigger picture
Yes.
of God wants to do with what God wants to do with it.
Yes. Yes, that is also true. We are really happy that we studied Mordecai, and we're going to look at other examples to learn how worshippers of God before us coped with adversity. We thank you for participating with us in this Bible study, and we pray that you will learn something from this that will strengthen your commitment to worship and serve God in all circumstances, and that this commitment will not waver even in adversity. Because as we see in this study, because Mordecai remained steadfast in his commitment to worship and serve God, he was able to defeat an adversity that lasted for a long time. He was able to conquer it. We thank you for participating with us, and we pray that you learn something from our Bible studies that will make a positive impact on your life and will bring you closer to God's purpose for your life. Thank you, and God bless you.
God bless you.